Hey, what's up guys? Aldrin Estacio here with FlytPath.com, and I just want to go through a quick tutorial for you on how I dial in doing long exposure photography with the DJI Mavic Pro. Good morning guys. So I'm here at Sunset Cliffs, San Diego, California. It's a nice gloomy morning, and that's actually exactly why I went out this morning. What I want to do is show you how I set up long exposure photography with the DJI Mavic Pro. I want to go through the steps I take. We'll try to get some shots over here. A little bit of wave might be kind of cool. Wait for things like that to come through. Getting the splash right up on these rocks. Good color right here. So if I were to bring my drone out around that area, point it back in, lovely texture, and then of course we got some San Diego backdrop. So let's get all set up. I want to go through with you how I dial in my filters so I can shoot long exposure photography with the DJI Mavic Pro. So to get started with doing long exposure photography with the DJI Mavic, you're going to need a few things. Of course, you need the Mavic, and then what you're going to want to get is purchase something like this, which is in my case, I'm using the set of Polar Pro filters. These are ND filters. What this does is you're basically neutral density filters. Because of the fact that your Mavic is a fixed aperture, it's a fixed at f2.2. So it's fixed that way. You cannot adjust the aperture size. You can't bring it down to an f5.6 or an f8 or f11 or anything like that. It's fixed, it's wide open at f2. So because of the fact that you can't change that, you can only change the other two exposure things, which are shutter speed and ISO. When we're doing long exposure photography, we're gonna wanna keep the ISO as low as possible. So basically ISO is the light sensitivity on the sensor. So when you look at numbers like ISO 100 and 200, the lower the number, the better. So once you start bumping up that number to 800 and 1600 and 3200, that's when you start seeing grain in your photos. So we know that the aperture is fixed at f2.2. The ISO, we want the best quality with minimal grain. So we want to keep the ISO at 100. The only thing that leaves us with is shutter speed. Basically give you guys a quick tutorial on how I dial in shooting long exposure at the beach, shooting waves, getting that nice kind of blur or motion effect in the water. In order for you to get that motion, what you want to do is slow the shutter speed down. So if you have a really, really fast shutter speed, 0.002 of a second, you're going to freeze everything, right? So if you take a picture of the wave at a fast shutter speed, it'll freeze the wave. And if you're going for that, great. But this one is more about how do I make that wave look kind of silky? How do I make the ocean look a little silky and show movement within the water? And when shooting water, you want to be able to slow it down to anywhere between starting point at around maybe a quarter to a half second, all the way up to however long you want to go, maybe 4 to 5 seconds, however long you can go based on the light available, the ambient light, as well as what filters you currently have in your set. It's a nice gloomy day today, and I'm gonna try to dial my shutter speed down to about half a second to a second. Photo settings, which is, you're gonna switch from video to photo, which is on the right-hand side. Instead of auto, what you wanna do is go to manual. Now, in manual mode for photos, the first thing you wanna do is set your ISO to 100. You want the cleanest possible photo with minimal grain. So ISO 100 or 200 is where you want to be at. So we'll keep that there. Now, as you can see here, the only thing that I can really adjust is my shutter speed. Now, if I go a faster shutter, of course, the exposure will be a little bit better because of the fact that I'm at an f2, which is a nice wide open aperture. But what we want to do is slow the shutter speed down. So we want this number to go not from shutter speed 1/20th of a second. We want it all the way down to something about, half a second or so, or a quarter of a second. So by doing that manually right now on land, a half a second is extremely overexposed still. So the only way that we can get that exposure down now and slow that shutter speed down is to introduce something like an ND filter. So what I always recommend doing is starting out with a very strong filter. You want to be able to have a set. So something that can give you an option of like 16, ND16, And what I have is all the way up to the ND32 and the ND64. I recently got the ND64, and this is the one that you'll want to get. ND64 and ND6 and 32. So depending on your ambient light, right now the sun's starting to come up. So you're gonna want, because the sun's starting to come up, you're gonna want a very strong filter to start with. In this case, I'm gonna use an ND64. If it was earlier in the morning and it was darker, you might use an ND32. It really depends on the lighting situation. But the idea is to find the right filter to use in order for you to get that half second, quarter second, or 1 second shutter speed at the proper exposure. So this is the ND64. I'm gonna go ahead and put this onto the Mavic. So what you wanna do is power down the Mavic, go ahead and turn it over. And the one thing you're gonna wanna do is make sure you have your gimbal clamp available. What you wanna do is put that gimbal clamp back on. And the reason why you wanna do that is that when you put this filter on, you're gonna have to hold that gimbal. By having that clamp in there, it keeps your gimbal secure, it limits the movement, and that way you can safely put your filter on. So right now this is the ND64 Polar Pro Cinema Series lens that I will be using on the Mavic. So I put the clamp in, I'm gonna go ahead and put the filter right on top and make sure it's snug and pushed all the way back. And there you go, I have the ND64 filter on. Now, what you're going to do is go ahead and remove the clamp, point it back out, power it back on, and go through the app. Now, when the app starts up and your settings are in there, ISO 100, you're already at f2, you can't do anything about that. Now, I was overexposed at half a second, and now my exposure actually looks pretty good at a half a second. There you go. If I were out here earlier, about an hour or two earlier, I could have probably used a 64 and gotten something like a 3 or 4 second exposure because of the fact that there would be less light, which means you have to open up that shutter speed longer. So if you're shooting to do a longer exposure, something like a 3 or 4 seconds, you're gonna wanna make sure your ambient light is very, very dark. Sunrise, sunsets are gonna be the best time for you to experiment with this. So let's get flying and see what photos I come up with. So right now, if you have waves crashing, all that stuff will be captured in that 1 second and be smoothed over that in that 1 second. So you'll see nice silky movement in the water. As you can see, or can see in my video feed, I am right above, let me see if you can see that here. I'm right above the cliffs, waiting for those waves to crash in. And once they do, I'll go ahead and snap that photo. And I want to look at the composition too. So if I'm looking at that green, I see nice green. There's my snap. I'm actually looking at the camera while the camera's looking at the iPad and actually taking some photos there just by looking at that because I'm already set up, it's ready to go. So there it is, guys. Shooting long exposures with the DJI Mavic. Once again, this is Aldrin Estacio with FlytPath.com. I really hope you guys got some value out of my video, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe if you already haven't. Also, don't forget to check out my website, FlytPath.com, where I have a lot of my aerial photography. Check out the site when you get a chance. Hope this video helped. If you got value, don't forget to like it, and I will be back shortly with another one. Take care, guys.